He didn't even look at her when he said it. That was the part that stayed with Elena long after the night ended, not the words themselves, not the laughter from the crowd, not even the way Celeste Rowan placed her hand on Adrian's arm like she belonged there. It was the fact that he never once turned his head. He spoke about her the way a man speaks about old furniture he keeps meaning to throw out. She was useful, back when I needed someone to hold things together. But that season's over. The gala crowd smiled politely. Champagne glasses caught the light, and Elena, 7 months pregnant and standing close enough to hear every word, felt something inside her go very, very still. Not broken, not shattered, still. Like a woman who had already made her decision and was only now watching it confirmed. If you have ever stood in a room full of people and realized that the one person who was supposed to protect you is the source of your danger, then you already know what Elena felt that night. And if you've ever had to choose between surviving quietly and burning everything down on your way out, this story's for you. Stay with us through all 5 parts. Subscribe to this channel right now so you don't miss what comes next, because this story is going to take you somewhere you won't expect. Hit the like button and drop a comment telling us the city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning of the night. Elena Vale stopped pretending. The gala was held at the Meridian Club on the 53rd floor of a building that cost more to rent for one evening than most families earned in a year. It was the kind of event where the flowers on the tables were flown in from somewhere else, where the waitstaff had been trained not to make eye contact, and where the conversations were really negotiations wearing tuxedos. Elena had attended 6 of these events in the past 3 years. She had learned how to stand correctly, how to smile without showing too much warmth, how to answer questions about Adrian's business without revealing anything, and without appearing to hide anything either. She had become, without ever being asked or thanked for it, very good at being Adrian Vale's wife. Tonight she wore a deep navy dress she had ordered 2 months ago before the weight in her midsection had shifted enough to change how everything fit. The dress still worked, but only just. She was 7 months along, and her body had stopped asking her permission for anything. Her ankles had been swollen since Tuesday. She hadn't told Adrian because he had a way of looking at physical discomfort, like it was a personal inconvenience he hadn't signed up for. He was across the room when she arrived. She had taken a car separately because he had a pre-event meeting that ran long, or so the message from his assistant said. She'd stopped expecting explanations that came directly from Adrian around the time their son stopped being an abstract idea and started being a real weight she carried everywhere. She got a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. She found a spot near the windows where she could see the city laid out below and still watch the room without being caught watching it. Old habit. She'd learned it in the early years, when she was trying to understand the rules of a world she hadn't grown up in. Adrian found her 20 minutes later. He looked good. He always looked good at these things: dark suit, easy confidence, that particular kind of tiredness that reads as gravitas on powerful men. He kissed her cheek. He asked if she'd eaten. She said she'd had something in the car. You should eat real food, he said. I will, she said. He was already scanning the room. She watched his gaze land on Celeste Rowan, who was standing near the bar with 2 men Elena didn't recognize. Celeste was wearing something silver and backless, and she had a way of inhabiting a space that made everything around her seem slightly less vivid by comparison. She was beautiful in an aggressive way, the kind of beautiful that knew exactly what it was doing at all times. Celeste had been Adrian's strategic advisor for 14 months. Elena had met her at a company dinner 6 weeks after she joined, and she had known something was wrong immediately, not because of anything Celeste said or did, but because of how Adrian stopped finishing his sentences when Celeste walked into the room. Like his thoughts needed to be recalibrated. She's here, Elena said. Celeste? Of course. This is a company event. He said it the way you say of course to a child who's asked something obvious. I know what kind of event it is. He looked at her then, but not the way she needed him to. He looked at her the way you look at a problem you've already decided isn't worth solving tonight. Don't start, he said. I haven't started anything. Elena. She looked back out the window. Below them the city moved, indifferent and enormous, and full of people living their own versions of this exact conversation. He left to work the room. That was the phrase he used. Work the room, like a room full of people, was a territory to be claimed rather than a place where humans gathered. She watched him cross the floor. She watched the way people turned toward him. She had found that attractive once, that gravitational pull. She had mistaken it for strength when what it really was, she understood now, was appetite. Adrian wanted things. He wanted them efficiently, and he didn't apologize for it. For a long time, Elena had told herself that was ambition. Later, she had understood it was something closer to hunger that never got full. She talked to a woman named Margaret something, who ran a foundation connected to maritime law reform, and who seemed genuinely surprised that Elena knew anything about shipping compliance regulations. They talked for almost 20 minutes, and it was the best conversation Elena had at the event. Margaret gave her a business card. Elena put it in her small evening bag and knew she would probably never use it and felt a specific kind of grief about that. The formal portion of the evening began around 9. Adrian was being recognized another award, another acknowledgement of the empire he'd built. Elena sat at the main table with the other partners and their wives. Celeste sat 3 seats down. Elena could see her without turning her head. The speeches were long. The room was too warm. Elena's lower back had been aching since before she left the apartment, a low, persistent pressure that she was learning to manage by shifting her weight and not drawing attention to it. She sipped water. She kept her expression neutral and pleasant. She had become very skilled at neutral and pleasant. Then Adrian took the microphone. He was good at this, she had always given him that. He knew how to hold a room. He started with a story about the early days, about driving a second-hand truck to the port of Newark at 3 a.m, about calling in favors from men who didn't owe him any. The crowd laughed in the right places. He had a gift for making his own ambition sound like a love story between a man and his dream. And then he said it. He was talking about the people who'd helped him get where he was, the season of building he called it, and he said there had been a time when he'd needed someone to hold the administrative side together while he focused on the vision. He said it lightly, almost as an aside, the way you mention a tool that served its purpose. She was useful back when I needed someone to hold things together. But that season's over. He said it to the crowd. He said it with a small, self-deprecating smile, like it was a piece of modest self-awareness. Like he was admitting to a youthful dependency he'd outgrown. He did not say Elena's name. He did not look at her. Celeste Rowan, 3 seats down, let out a small breath of a laugh and brought her champagne glass to her lips. The woman next to Elena, the wife of a shipping broker named Gerald, patted her hand and then pretended she hadn't. That small, involuntary gesture of pity was somehow worse than anything Adrian had said. Elena felt it land in her chest and detonate quietly. She did not cry. She had cried in this marriage, plenty of times, in the bathroom, in the car, once in a parking garage in Midtown at 2 p.m, with the engine running and no particular destination in mind. She was done crying in front of anyone who might report it back. She smiled. She brought her water glass to her lips. She breathed, and she thought 12 more hours. She had been counting down for longer than she wanted to admit. The apartment was on the 41st floor of a building that overlooked the park, which in the 3 years she'd lived there had never stopped feeling like someone else's apartment. Elena had brought things from her life before Adrian books. A lamp she'd had since graduate school, a coffee mug with a chipped handle she refused to throw away because her mother had given it to her, but they never quite took root. The apartment absorbed them the way a formal room absorbs things that don't belong, quietly, without acknowledgement. By the time she got home, it was almost 11. Adrian had stayed at the event. Another meeting, another conversation, another hour of being the most important man in whatever room he occupied. She hadn't said goodbye. She had stood up, said something to the woman on her left about needing to rest, and walked out. In the elevator she had calculated. The bag was already packed. She'd been doing it in stages for 3 weeks. A maternity dress here, a pair of shoes there, slipped into the old hard-sided suitcase. She kept on the high shelf in the guest room closet, the one Adrian had no reason to open. She hadn't taken anything he'd given her. She hadn't taken jewelry or the cashmere coat or anything purchased with his money. She'd taken her own things, which were fewer than they should have been after a decade together. She'd taken her laptop. She'd taken the letters her mother had written her over the years, kept in an elastic banded bundle in a shoebox she'd stored behind a stack of towels. She'd taken the silver bracelet. The bracelet was not something she talked about. She had worn it since she was 3 years old, since the day she arrived at the state facility outside Boston with no memory of where she'd come from and only 2 possessions, a half of a burned photograph, and a small bracelet shaped like a bird in flight, its wings spread, its feet drawn up. It was silver and had been cleaned and polished so many times over the years that some of the detail had softened, but the shape remained. Her mother, her adoptive mother, Margaret Reyes, who had died 4 years ago of a cancer that moved faster than anyone expected, had kept the bracelet for her until Elena was old enough not to lose it. Elena never took it off. She was in the bedroom now, moving carefully, keeping the overhead light off, and using the small lamp on the bedside table. She wasn't trying to be deceptive. There was no one home to deceive. She was operating efficiently, the way she'd learned to operate in the last months, not out of fear exactly, but out of a kind of conserved energy, like a woman who knows she needs everything she has left for what comes next. She opened the closet. She retrieved the suitcase. It was heavier than she expected, and she had to set it on the bed carefully because of the angle, because of the way her center of gravity had shifted. She sat beside it for a moment. She put her hand on her stomach, not performatively, just because the baby was moving, a slow roll that she'd come to recognize as his version of settling in. "I know," she said quietly, almost. She was going to a friend's apartment in the West Village. Donna, who had known Elena since before Adrian and who had asked no questions and made no judgments when Elena had called 2 weeks ago and said she might need a place. Donna had said, "The key is under the mat. Come whenever. I'll have the back room ready." That was all. That was everything. She opened the suitcase to do a final check. She needed to be sure she had the letters, the bracelet she touched her wrist reflexively, and the laptop. The laptop was wrapped in a soft cloth and tucked beneath the suitcase's inner lining, which she had carefully cut open along one seam and resealed with iron-on hem tape. She'd done it on a Tuesday afternoon, when Adrian was in Boston, and the housekeeper wasn't scheduled. She'd been calm the entire time, which had surprised her. She'd expected her hands to shake. They hadn't. She pressed the lining. The laptop was there. The documents were there. 10 years of records. Contracts from the early years when the company was called Vail Maritime Solutions and operated out of a shared office space in Hoboken. Bank transfer statements from the account she had maintained with her own savings, the one she used to fund the first warehouse lease, because Adrian's credit rating had been garbage, and hers, from 7 years of careful management, had not been. Emails she'd sent and received about the compliance system she'd designed from scratch over 8 months of nights and weekends while working a full-time job, the system that had kept the company's early contracts alive when the regulatory environment shifted. She had designed it. She had documented it. She had saved the documentation to external drives in 3 separate locations because she was the kind of person that someday she would need to prove something she had never expected to need to prove. She had also 3 months ago done something else. She had sent a DNA sample to a private genomics firm that offered ancestry analysis and familial matching. She had done it on an impulse she didn't fully understand, or maybe she had understood it, but hadn't been ready to look at it directly. It had something to do with the bracelet, with a conversation she'd had with her mother in the hospital, in the last days when her mother was clear enough to speak and had said, with an effort Elena could see cost her something, "I never told you everything I knew, because I thought it would hurt you, and then I thought I'd have more time. And I'm sorry, Elena." There was a family, a real family. They looked. Her mother had drifted after that. Elena had held her hand and asked what she meant, and her mother had said, "The bracelet, the bird, I kept the letter." There was no letter when Elena went through her mother's things. Or there was, but it was incomplete, water-damaged, half missing, and Elena had been able to read only fragments. A name, a city, a description of a 3-year-old child found in a bus station. She had sent the DNA sample. The results had come back 6 weeks ago. She had read them once, sitting in the bathtub with the water gone cold, and then she had printed them, folded them twice, and put them inside the suitcase lining with the laptop. She had not told Adrian. She had not told anyone. She pressed the lining flat now and lowered the clothing back over it, dressed the suitcase like nothing was there, snapped it shut. She was standing in the bedroom doorway, pulling on her coat when she heard the elevator. She checked her phone. It was 11:40. Adrian was early. She heard the front door open. She heard him cross to the main room. She heard him stop. She walked into the hallway. He was standing in the living room with his jacket off and his tie loosened, and a glass of something he'd already poured in his hand. He was looking at her with an expression she had catalogued years ago, not angry yet, but arranging himself toward it. "You left," he said. "I was tired. You didn't say anything. You were in the middle of something." Elena. He said her name the way he always said it when she was not behaving the way he'd expected. Like the name itself was a correction. "I'm fine," she said. "I was tired and my back hurts and I needed to come home. I'm going to sleep. We need to talk." "About what?" He looked at her. "About tonight," she almost said. "I agree." Almost said, "Yes, let's talk about tonight." Let's talk about what you said into a microphone in a room full of people who know me. But she had learned, in the years of this marriage, that those conversations had a shape to them. They started with her grievance and ended with his. They started with something he'd done and ended with some deficiency in her she hadn't previously understood she had. It can wait, she said. I don't think it should. Adrian. She kept her voice very even. I'm 7 months pregnant. My back has been hurting all day. I'm going to sleep. He looked at her for a long moment. She watched him calculate. Fine, he said, sleep. She turned toward the bedroom. The guest room, he said behind her, has your suitcase out. She stopped. The housekeeper. Or he had gone in earlier. Or she had been careless about the closet door. She didn't know. It didn't matter. She turned around slowly. He was looking at her. Why is there a suitcase packed in the guest room? He said. It wasn't a question, really. It was the beginning of something. She thought about the lining, the laptop, the records. The folded DNA report tucked in with 10 years of evidence. She thought about 12 more hours becoming something that had already run out. I've been meaning to reorganize, she said. He walked toward her. Not fast. Measured. He set his glass down on the side table as he passed it, never taking his eyes off her. He walked down the hall, past where she was standing, to the guest room. She heard the door open. She heard him cross the floor. She heard him lift the suitcase. She walked into the hall and stood in the guest room doorway. He was looking at the suitcase. He ran his thumb along the seam where she had restitched the lining. That's not original, he said quietly. She said nothing. He looked at her. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she had his complete and absolute attention. What's in here, Elena? She said nothing. He pulled at the seam. The iron-on hem tape held for approximately 2 seconds. Then the lining folded back. The cloth-wrapped laptop was right there. He looked at it. He looked at her. He picked it up slowly and unwrapped it. He set it on the bed and opened it. It was password protected. He looked at her with something she hadn't seen on his face before, not anger, not contempt, but a particular kind of stillness that was, she realized, fear wearing a mask. Open it, he said. She crossed her arms over her chest, over her son. Elena. He put the laptop down. He reached into the suitcase and moved the clothing side. The DNA report was folded inside a plain white envelope she'd labeled with nothing. He picked it up, opened it. She watched him read. She watched his face do something she couldn't fully track: disbelief, recalculation, something that might have been calculation if he'd been faster, but he wasn't fast enough for what he was reading. Nobody would be. He looked up. This says I know what it says. This says I know. He put the paper down on the bed very carefully, the way you put down something fragile. How long, he said. 6 weeks. You've known for 6 weeks. He wasn't asking. He was accounting for it, the way he accounted for everything, putting it on a ledger, figuring out what it cost him. Yes. And you weren't going to tell me. No, she said. I wasn't. He looked at her for a long moment. Is it real? He said. The test. It was done at Hargrove Genomics. 3 confirmation. Yes, it's real. Then I'm Elena, she said. I've always been Elena. What the test says about where I came from doesn't change that. He sat down on the edge of the bed, slowly, like his legs had made the decision without him. He looked at the report again. He looked at the laptop. He looked at the suitcase with its open lining. She watched him understand not everything, not yet, but enough. She watched him understand that she had been planning this for months, that she had been careful and quiet and right under his roof, and that whatever he had believed about the woman he married, he had missed something fundamental about her. You were going to disappear, he said. I was going to leave, she said. There's a difference. With my son. With my son, she said. And with everything that belongs to me. He looked up. His face had reorganized itself into something harder. You're not going anywhere, he said. Adrian. Elena, you are carrying my child and you are not. I am going, she said quietly, to pick up that suitcase. And I am going to leave this apartment. And you are going to let me. Because you know that if you try to stop me tonight, I will make a phone call that neither of us wants me to make. She watched him calculate. She watched him weigh it. She watched him come to the same conclusion she had already arrived at 6 weeks ago when she read that DNA report and understood that she was not, and had never been, powerless. She had simply been waiting to use what she had. He didn't move. She picked up the suitcase. She walked to the front door. She put on her coat with one hand, the suitcase in the other, and she stepped into the elevator. She did not look back. The elevator hummed downward. She pressed her back against the wall and breathed. Her son moved again, that slow, recognizable roll, and she put her hand flat against her side. I've got you, she said. The lobby came up to meet her. The doorman called her a cab without being asked. She gave Donna's address. She got in. Behind her, 41 floors up. She could feel, not see, not hear, but feel the moment Adrian Vale understood that he had never known, not really, who he had married, and that the woman in that suitcase's hidden lining had been preparing to prove it for longer than he could imagine. The cab smelled like pine air freshener and old vinyl, and Elena kept her face turned toward the window the entire ride downtown. She wasn't crying. She had checked twice, pressing her fingers lightly against her jaw, the way she did when she needed to confirm that her face was doing what she intended rather than what it felt. It was. She looked composed. She looked like a woman on her way somewhere at midnight, which was exactly what she was. Her phone had been silent since she'd got in the car. She'd expected something. A call. A text. Something with Adrian's name on it that she would have to decide whether to answer. But her phone stayed dark in her lap, and that silence had its own particular texture, the kind that isn't peace but is the space just before peace becomes impossible. Donna's building was a 5-floor walk-up on a street that had been gentrifying for 15 years without fully committing to it. There were restaurants Elena recognized from the years before Adrian and laundromats that had been there since before she was born, and a bodega on the corner that sold coffee at any hour without judgment. It was the kind of neighborhood she had grown up adjacent to, not in she had grown up in South Boston in a 2-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner's where her mother Margaret had ironed other people's clothes on weekends to make the rent. She had spent a very long time wanting to leave that life. It had taken her even longer to understand what she'd left behind when she did. Donna was waiting at the door of her apartment when Elena got to the 3rd floor. She had obviously been asleep, her hair was loose, and her face had that softened, unguarded quality of someone dragged awake by a phone call, but she had put on a sweater, and there was a light on in the kitchen, and she didn't say anything when Elena came through the door, just took the suitcase from her hand and set it against the wall and put her arms around her very carefully. The way you hold someone who is carrying something fragile. "I'm okay," Elena said into her shoulder. "I know," Donna said. "I didn't go into labor in the cab, I can see that." "His name is Noah," Elena said. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out the way things come out when you've been holding them against your sternum for months. "I haven't told anyone yet. I haven't even told Adrian. I know his name is Noah." Donna pulled back and looked at her. Her eyes were wet. "That's a good name," she said. "I know," Elena said. She slept in the back room on a bed that was slightly too short for her, and woke 3 times, once from a noise outside, once from the baby, once from a dream she couldn't hold on to, but that left her with a feeling like standing in a doorway and not knowing which direction was forward. She lay in the dark and listened to the city and thought about the suitcase against the wall in Donna's hallway and the lining she had so carefully restitched and the way Adrian's face had looked reading the DNA report, not angry. Yet but recalibrating, and that was somehow worse. In the morning, she ate 2 pieces of toast and half a grapefruit and called her OB's office to move her appointment up. She did not call Adrian. At 9:14, Adrian called her. She looked at the phone. She let it ring 4 times. She picked up. "I want you to come home," he said. He didn't say good morning. He didn't ask how she'd slept, or whether she'd gotten there safely, or whether Noah was okay. He said he wanted her to come home the way someone says they want a file sent over by end of day. "That's not going to happen," she said. A pause. Not long. She had learned to read his pauses. This one was him deciding which approach to take. "Elena, you're pregnant. You're 7 months pregnant and where are you? You're at Donna's? That's not your concern right now. My child's location is absolutely. I'm fine. The baby is fine. I'm at a friend's apartment and I'm safe and everything I need is here. You can't seriously..." He stopped. She heard him breathe. She heard him do what she'd watched him do in boardrooms. The deliberate reset, the choice to change register. "I think we both said things last night that we need to walk back." "You said things last night," she said, into a microphone, to a room full of people. Silence. "I wasn't talking about you," he said. "That Adrian." She kept her voice flat, not angry. Flat was harder to argue with than angry. "Don't." Another pause. "The DNA report," he said. "What about it? We need to talk about what that means." "I know what it means. There are implications legally, financially. I am aware of the implications," she said, "which is exactly why I'm not coming home." Elena. His voice had changed again, dropped lower. She recognized this register too, not the boardroom voice, not the public voice, but the private one, the one that used to reach her in a way nothing else did. "I know things haven't been good. I know I've been..." "Please don't do this. I know what you're trying to do," she said. "I need you to hear me very clearly. I am not coming back to that apartment right now." I am not going to have this conversation over the phone. When there is something legally necessary to discuss, you can contact my attorney. A beat. You have an attorney, he said. I do, she said. Which was not entirely true, yet she had a name and a scheduled call for 10:30 that morning, but it was true enough. He was quiet for a moment. Who's paying for that? He said, and the question had a particular texture to it, something that wasn't quite a threat but wanted to be. I am, she said, with my own money, from my own account. She had opened the account 2 years ago, a separate savings account at a bank she'd chosen specifically because Adrian did not use it. She had deposited small amounts, then larger amounts, as she learned to carve space in the household accounts without creating a pattern he'd notice. Financial forensics was something she understood. Because she'd had to understand it, she'd built the compliance system for his company, partly by learning to read money, the way other people read language, to trace it and follow it and know what it was doing even when it was trying not to be noticed. Adrian had never asked about the account because Adrian had never imagined it existed. That was the thing about being underestimated for long enough. Eventually it became tactical. Elena, he said, and now the voice had changed a third time, harder around the edges. That report changes things. You understand that. Whatever you think you're doing, whatever you've been planning, that report, is mine, she said. My DNA, my result, my information to share or not share as I see fit. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. She ended the call. She sat at Donna's kitchen table and pressed the phone face down against the wood and breathed. The toast had gone cold. She ate it anyway because Noah needed her to eat. And because she had learned in the last months that taking care of herself and taking care of him had become the same thing, which was a kind of clarity she hadn't expected but was grateful for. Donna came in from the bedroom in yesterday's with her hair pulled back. How bad, she said, getting the coffee going. He's scared, Elena said. He doesn't know he's scared. He thinks he's angry. But I could hear it. What does he know? Enough. Elena folded her hands on the table. He knows I had the records. He found the laptop. He doesn't know the password, it's encrypted, but he knows it exists. And he knows I've been keeping documentation. And he read the DNA report. Donna turned around. The Vera thing. Yes. And he went quiet, Elena said, which is worse than loud with Adrian. When he goes quiet, he's calculating. Donna poured 2 cups and set one in front of Elena. She sat down across from her. What does that family know, she said. The Vera family. Elena wrapped both hands around the mug. I don't know yet. I sent a message through the genomics firm's contact system 2 weeks ago. A notification that a match had been identified and that the matching party was open to limited communication. That's all. I haven't heard back. You think they will? I think, Elena said carefully, that a family that has been looking for a missing child for 30 years doesn't stop just because the child is grown. She had thought about Matteo Vera exactly twice in the 6 weeks since the test results came back. The first time, she'd looked him up online carefully, on an incognito browser on a device that wasn't connected to any account Adrian had access to. She'd found what there was to find, a man in his early 60s, based in Rome, the head of an international shipping concern that operated in 11 countries and made Adrian's company look like a regional enterprise. Silver-haired in photographs, with a quality in his face that Elena had studied for longer than she wanted to admit, looking for something she recognized. She wasn't sure she'd found it. She wasn't sure she'd know what she was looking for. The second time she'd thought about him was in the elevator going down from Adrian's apartment, with her suitcase in her hand, and she'd thought, if he comes, I am not a daughter. I am Elena. I will need him to understand that first. She didn't know yet if he would. She had her attorney call at 10:30. His name was Marcus Webb, and he had been recommended by a woman Elena had met at a compliance conference 3 years ago. If you ever need someone who knows how to handle powerful men without blinking, call Marcus. He had a voice like gravel wrapped in something expensive, and he asked questions in a specific order that told her he had heard versions of this story before and had learned which details mattered. She told him about the records, about the account, about the compliance system she'd built, about what she estimated her financial contribution to the early years of the company had been, which was not a small number. He was quiet for a moment. The DNA result, he said. You understand that has implications beyond the divorce. I know. The Vera estate is substantial. If your identity is confirmed through proper legal channels, there are inheritance questions, potential claims, existing corporate structures that would need to... I'm not interested in the Vera estate, she said. A pause. Elena, I understand that's your position right now. But you need to understand that once that information is part of a legal record, other parties will have interests in it, regardless of your personal feelings about those interests. I understand, she said. I want to focus on the divorce and on custody. The rest, the Vera situation, I need to manage that separately and carefully. Is there any risk that your husband will attempt to use that information against you? She thought about Adrian going quiet, about his voice dropping to that particular register. Yes, she said. Then we move fast, Marcus said. I need everything you have. Every record, every documented contribution, every communication that establishes your role in building that company. Can you get me the laptop? Yes, she said. How soon? Today, she said. I can have it to your office today. After she hung up, she sat for a while longer in Donna's kitchen. The city was fully awake outside the window. She could hear it, layers of it, traffic and a delivery truck and someone somewhere playing music, and a dog that had been barking at the same pitch for the past 20 minutes, committed to its grievance. She thought about Adrian in the apartment upstairs from where she'd left him. She thought about the way he'd sat on the edge of the bed with the DNA report in his hands. She had not seen him look like that before, not uncertain exactly, but rearranging, the way a man rearranges a room when something won't fit where he expected it to. She knew him. That was the complicated truth she could not make simple, no matter how she tried. She had known Adrian Vale for 10 years and loved him for most of them, and understood him in a way that was specific to people who have spent a long time watching someone carefully. She knew that the silence was worse than the anger. She knew that he would make phone calls this morning to people who advised him, and that those calls would go a certain direction once they knew about the DNA report. She knew Celeste would know by noon. She knew Celeste was not just an advisor. She had known that for 8 months, which was different from being able to prove it, and proving it was what she'd spent the last 4 of those months quietly working toward. She picked up the phone and sent a text to Marcus Webb's assistant with her afternoon availability. Then she called her OB's office and confirmed the appointment. Then she went to take a shower because she was 7 months pregnant and she had slept 4 broken hours, and she had a great deal to do today and she needed to be functional for all of it. She was not fine. She knew she was not fine. But she was upright and she was moving, and she had learned from her mother, from the years of her own life before Adrian, from the specific education that comes from being a woman who has had to build things from nothing more than once, that upright and moving was sometimes enough. It was enough to start. The meeting with Marcus Webb was at 2 in the afternoon in an office building in Midtown that smelled like money in the particular way that serious law firms do leather and recycled air, and a specific quality of quiet that costs a lot to maintain. His assistant offered her water and she accepted it, and sat in a chair across from his desk that was more comfortable than it looked, and she opened the laptop and entered the password and started walking him through it. Marcus Webb did not react visibly to most things. She got the impression that was a trained quality, something he'd developed the way surgeons develop steadiness in their hands. But halfway through the third folder, the one with the original wire transfer records, personal savings account to the Hoboken warehouse lease, she saw something shift in his face. Not dramatic. Just a slight repositioning. The way a man looks when he starts to understand that what he thought was a domestic dispute is something more structurally interesting. This is the original lease funding, he said. Yes. In your name. It was a personal loan to the company, she said, which was never formally repaid. It was absorbed into the corporate structure as a contribution during reorganization, except the reorganization paperwork never listed me as a contributing party. Because Adrian's attorney at the time was a man named Gerald Foster, who Adrian had known since business school, and who I had raised concerns about twice, and who subsequently filed the reorganization paperwork without my name on it. You have documentation of your concerns? I have emails, she said. I have dates. I have a response from Gerald Foster that doesn't address the substance of my concern, which I believe was intentional. Marcus looked at her for a moment. You've been building this case for a long time, he said. I've been protecting myself for a long time, she said. There's a difference. He accepted that. He moved on. They were 40 minutes in when his assistant knocked and opened the door and said, in the apologetic tone of someone delivering news they'd rather not, Mr. Webb, I'm sorry to interrupt. There's a message from a Mr. Harlan Cross requesting an urgent call with you this afternoon. Marcus looked up. Harlan Cross, Elena said. She didn't phrase it as a question. You know the name, Marcus said. He's Adrian's corporate attorney. She felt something cold move through her chest. He's very good. Marcus looked at his assistant. Tell Mr. Cross, I'm unavailable this afternoon. He looked back at Elena. He'll know you've retained me by end of day. I expected that. It's going to accelerate things, I know, she said. That's fine. I'm ready. She said it and found, checking the statement against the actual state of her interior, that it was true. She was ready. She had been ready since she stitched the lining back into the suitcase and put the laptop inside it and gone back to the bedroom and gotten into bed next to Adrian and stared at the ceiling and waited for morning. What she hadn't accounted for was how fast Adrian would move. She found out at 4:15 when Marcus called her back. He's already filed, Marcus said. Emergency petition. He's claiming you've removed marital property, that the laptop constitutes company assets, and he's requesting a temporary restraining order preventing you from accessing or sharing any documents relating to Vale Maritime. She sat very still on Donna's couch. Noah moved against her ribs. He can't, she started. He's arguing that any documents you have that relate to company operations are proprietary. It's a stretch. But it buys him time, and it gets a judge's name on something, which changes the optics. The records predate the company's incorporation under its current structure, she said. The funding records predate it by 2 years. Those aren't company documents. I know, and I'll argue that. But he's going to try to freeze the laptop as evidence, and if he gets a sympathetic judge, make copies, she said, everything. Right now. Can you do that? Already in progress, she breathed. She pressed her fingers against the back of her hand, a grounding technique her therapist had taught her 3 years ago that she'd stopped using when she stopped seeing the therapist, which she'd stopped doing because Adrian had once said, lightly, that he wasn't sure therapy was helping her or just giving her more material for grievances. She'd stopped going, and she'd been angry at herself about it ever since. There's one more thing, Marcus said. She waited. I got a call at 3:45 from a firm in Rome. International family law practice. They represent a man named Matteo Vera, who, based on the notification sent through your genomic service, has been informed of a potential familial match and is requesting communication through legal channels. The room got very quiet. He moved fast, she said. His attorney said he's had investigators on this for 30 years. Marcus said the word fast might be relative. She looked at the window. Outside, the late afternoon light was doing something to the building across the street, turning the windows amber. What does he want, she said. Contact. Confirmation. His attorney was measured. But you could hear it underneath. He's been looking for his daughter for 3 decades, said Elena. She closed her eyes for a moment. Tell his attorney I'm willing to communicate through legal representatives at this time. Nothing direct, nothing in person. Not yet. Understood. And Marcus, keep this separate from the divorce proceedings for as long as possible. I don't want Adrian knowing the Vera family has made contact. He'll find out. Yes, she said, but later is better than now. After she hung up, she stayed on the couch for a long time without moving. Donna came in from the back room and sat in the chair across from her without asking anything, which was the particular gift of 20-year friendships. She just sat there, and the room held both of them, and outside the city, kept doing what the city did. He filed, Elena said finally. Fast, Donna says. He's afraid, Elena said. When Adrian is afraid, he moves fast and he moves hard, and he ties things up legally so that by the time you're ready to respond, the terrain has already changed. So what do you do? Elena looked at the suitcase against the wall. The suitcase that had held her life in its lining. The suitcase that had been for months the only room that was entirely hers. I stopped letting him choose the terrain, she said. The following morning she did something she had not planned to do for another 2 weeks. She called a number she had written in the back of her mother's letters, in a margin, in her own handwriting, from the day she'd found the name in the water-damaged fragment of the letter her mother had meant to give her. The number rang twice. A man answered. His voice was low and accented, Italian underneath the English, and she could hear in it something she wasn't prepared for, a quality of attention, the kind that belongs to people who have been waiting for something for a very, very long time and have trained themselves not to show it. This is Elena Reyes, she said. She used her mother's name, not Adrian's. I understand your attorney has been in contact with mine. A pause. She heard him breathe. Yes, Matteo Vera said. I'm not calling to establish a relationship, she said carefully. I'm calling because I need you to understand something before we proceed through legal channels. Okay, he said. His voice was very careful, like a man holding something that might break. I am not the 3-year-old girl you're looking for, she said. I mean, I may have been once, but I am 33 years old, and I have a life and a name and a history that belong to me. If you want to know me, if that's even something we decide we want, it happens on my terms, slowly, and not because of a legal process or a DNA report. Do you understand that? Silence. Yes, Matteo Vera said. I understand. Good, she said. Then we can talk. She meant it as a small opening, a crack in a door, not the door itself. She had intended it to stay exactly that: managed, careful, contained. She had not anticipated what Matteo would say next. Aisnet, he said, and the way he said her name was different from the way anyone had said it in years. Not a correction, not a summons, just a name spoken by someone who had been afraid he would never have the chance to say it. I have to tell you something. Something I should have told your attorney first, I know. But I need you to hear it from me. She went still. My company, he said, has been watching Vale Maritime for 8 months. Not because of you, I didn't know about you then. Because Celeste Rowan's family, her father, Robert Rowan, has been attempting a hostile acquisition of my shipping lanes through Adrian's company as a proxy. They've been using Adrian to access ports and contracts that legally belong to the Vera network. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. How long have you known this? She said. 8 months, he said. We have documentation. Transactions. We have emails between Celeste Rowan and Robert Rowan that outline the strategy explicitly. The room rearranged itself around her. And Adrian? She said. A pause. That, Matteo said carefully, is what we don't yet know. Whether he's complicit or being used. She closed her eyes. She thought about the years of this marriage. About Adrian's ambition, which she had once called hunger. About Celeste's hand on his arm and the calculated way she laughed. About the compliance system Elena had built, the one that had protected the company's early contracts. The one that also, incidentally, kept the financial records in a particular format that was very traceable if you knew what you were looking at. I know how to read those transactions, she said. I know, Matteo said. Your attorney mentioned the documentation you have. That is partly why I wanted to speak with you directly. You need what's in my laptop, she said. Elena, you need what's in my laptop, she said again, and so does my attorney. And so does a federal financial crimes investigator, I suspect, when all of this comes out. She pressed her free hand flat against her side. Noah was still. Matteo, yes, this is going to get very complicated very fast. Yes, he said, I know. I need you to understand something else, she said. Whatever I give you, whatever I share with your attorneys or your investigators, it's because it's right. Not because I owe you anything. Not because of the DNA report. Not because she stopped, chose a different word. Not because of the test. I understand, he said. I'm not sure you do yet, she said, but I think you will. She ended the call. She sat in Donna's back room with her phone in her lap and her hand on her stomach and the suitcase in the hall in the city all around her, and she stayed very still while everything she had known about the situation rearranged itself into a different shape, larger, more complicated, with edges she couldn't see yet. Adrian hadn't just lost her. He didn't know it yet. But what he'd set in motion the night he dismissed her at that gala, the night he spoke into a microphone and didn't turn his head, had pulled something loose that was bigger than either of them. And it was moving. 3 days later, her water broke at 6 in the morning on Donna's bathroom floor. Donna called the ambulance while Elena gripped the doorframe and breathed in the specific way she'd practiced. The pattern her prenatal class instructor had called controlled, which seemed like a word chosen by someone who had never been in this particular situation. She was 8 weeks early. She knew that. She knew what 8 weeks early meant, and she filed that knowledge somewhere below the breathing and the grip on the doorframe and the voice in her head that said, he's okay. He's going to be okay. Just keep breathing. In the ambulance between contractions, she called Marcus Webb's after-hours number. I'm going into labor, she said. Early. I'm going to Mount Sinai. I need you to call Adrian. Are you sure? Marcus said. He's the father, she said. I'm not doing this out of. I'm just not going to be the person who didn't call. Understood. I'll reach out. Tell him the hospital, and that's all. Don't tell him anything else. She put the phone down and grabbed Donna's hand and breathed. The doors of the ambulance opened onto the hospital bay, and the light was too bright, and someone was talking to her in the calm, efficient tone of people who do this every day, and she answered their questions and answered them again. And at some point they put a needle in her arm, and the edges of things softened slightly, but didn't go away. She thought Noah. She thought, hold on. She thought, I packed the suitcase and I left and I made the calls and I didn't flinch. And none of that matters right now. None of it. The only thing that matters right now is this. The contraction that followed was the worst one yet. She made a sound she didn't recognize as coming from herself. Donna was beside her. I've got you, Donna said. Adrian arrived at the hospital at 8:47 in the morning. Elena knew the time because she had been watching the clock on the wall across from her bed in the way you watch a clock when you are trying to make time behave. He came in without knocking, which was Adrian, and stopped when he saw her, which was not something she had seen from him before that specific stop, like walking into a room and finding the architecture different from what you expected. She was wired to monitors. Her hair was loose. She was wearing a hospital gown, and she had not slept in 24 hours, and she was 7 weeks from her due date, and Noah's heartbeat was on a screen beside her, fast and real and steady. Adrian looked at the screen. She watched his face do something she couldn't name. How bad, he said. They think they can delay it. Maybe a few hours, maybe more. He might come today. His heartbeat is good? She said. He's small, but his heartbeat is good. Adrian crossed to the chair beside the bed. He sat. He didn't touch her. She hadn't asked him to. They existed in the same space with the sound of Noah's heartbeat between them and outside in the hall. She could hear voices and equipment and the ordinary noise of a building where people were fighting for things. I should have been kinder, Adrian said. He said it to the floor. She looked at him. That night, he said. The speech. I should not now, she said. Elena, Adrian. She waited until he looked at her. I don't need you to apologize to me right now. I need you to be here in case something goes wrong. That's all I need from you right now. Can you do that? He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. Then stay, she said. The door opened and a doctor came in with 2 nurses and everyone started talking at once, checking monitors and asking questions, and the room got very specific and procedural, and somewhere in that flurry of motion a decision was made. The delay wasn't holding. They were proceeding. They were moving now. Adrian stood. He looked at her and she looked at him, and in the space between them was everything that had happened and everything that hadn't, and the 10 years and the suitcase and the speech and the quiet, and also underneath all of it the 8 years before the last 2, when she had chosen him and meant it. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He looked at it before he could stop himself. She saw his eyes move to the screen. She said nothing. He looked back at her. I have to take this, he said.
Let's go, she said.
Elena, go, she said again. She turned her face toward the window. She heard him answer it. She heard him say Celeste's name. She heard him walk toward the door, his voice dropping, pulling the conversation away from the room, away from the monitors, away from the heartbeat on the screen. She heard the door close behind him. She closed her eyes. And Noah Vale came into the world in the next hour without his father in the room, which was not what Elena had wanted. And also she realized, somewhere past the pain and the exhaustion and the antiseptic brightness of the light above her. It was also the last thing she had needed to know. Noah weighed 4 pounds and 11 ounces when he arrived, which the neonatologist told Elena was on the better end of what they saw at this gestational age, and Elena held that number in her mind the way you hold a thing that is keeping you from going under. He was small. That was the first thing, how small he was, placed in her arms for 40 seconds before they took him to the NICU, 40 seconds in which Elena looked at his face and felt something rearrange itself in her chest so completely that she understood nothing would ever be in the same position again. His eyes were closed. His fingers were the size of her fingernail. He had a full head of dark hair that was still matted, and he made one sound, just one, high and thin and furious, like something that had not wanted to arrive early but had been given no choice. They took him to the NICU. Elena lay in the bed and stared at the ceiling, and Donna held her hand. He's okay, Donna said. I know, Elena said. I know, Elena said again. She wasn't dismissing Donna. She was holding the knowledge carefully, turning it over, making sure it stayed true. He's okay. 4 pounds 11. Strong heartbeat. Good lungs for this age. She had these facts and she was going to keep them. She did not ask about Adrian. She didn't have to. At some point, she wasn't tracking time well. In the first 2 hours, a nurse came in and said that Mr. Vale had asked to be informed when she was ready for visitors, and Elena had said she'd let them know, and she hadn't let them know. What she had done at some point before the exhaustion fully took her was text Marcus Webb Noah arrived early. Both okay. Don't let anything move on the legal side without my sign-off. I'll be in touch in 48 hours. Marcus had responded with 3 words, understood. Rest now. She slept for 4 hours in the hospital bed and woke to the specific disorientation of a room that was not any room she'd slept in before. Then she remembered where she was and why, and she sat up slowly and asked the nurse on duty if she could see her son. She could. She was not yet ambulatory without help, so a nurse walked her down the hall to the NICU in a wheelchair. She resented slightly and accepted completely, and they stopped outside the glass, and Elena looked in at the row of incubators, and the nurse pointed, and Elena saw Noah. He was in a small enclosed unit with warming lights and leads on his chest and a breathing monitor and a tiny knit hat someone had placed on his head yellow with a small cuffed brim. She had not expected the hat. It made her throat close. They let her hold him for 15 minutes with a nurse present. She held him in the curve of her arm, and his weight was so slight, it felt like holding something that hadn't fully decided yet whether to stay. And she bent her head close to his and said, very quietly, so that only he could hear, "You don't have to do anything right now. You just have to stay." He stayed. Adrian came at noon. She was back in her room, sitting up, eating what the hospital passed off as lunch soft, scrambled eggs and juice and toast she was eating because she had to when the door opened and he came in. He was in yesterday's suit, jacket off. He had not slept either. She could see it in the way he was holding his shoulders. He stopped just inside the door. "Can I come in?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. It was what it looked like when Adrian Vale made himself ask permission. "Yes," she said. He came to the chair beside the bed and sat. He didn't speak right away. She ate a piece of toast and waited. "I saw some," Adrian said, through the glass. "They wouldn't let me in yet," the nurse said, visiting protocol. "He needs to be stable for 48 hours before extended contact," Elena said. "They'll let you hold him tomorrow, probably." "He's so small," Adrian said. "He's going to be fine," she said. "His lungs are good. They said his lungs are the best thing." Adrian nodded. He looked at his hands. "I shouldn't have left," he said. She put the toast down. "No," she said. "You shouldn't have." "Celeste was—" He started. "I don't want to hear about Celeste." "Elena, I'm serious, Adrian. I just had your son without you in the room because you walked out of a hospital to take a phone call. I am not going to sit here the morning after and listen to an explanation about Celeste Rowan." He was quiet. "I know," he said. "I know." She looked at him. She looked at the man she had known for 10 years, the ambition of him, the specific quality of his exhaustion, the way his jaw set when he was holding something back that he didn't want to let go of. She had loved him. That was still true, technically, in the way that things you've carved out of yourself remain true even after they're no longer useful. "What are we doing?" she said, not angrily, genuinely asking. He looked up. "I don't know," he said, and she believed him, which was one of the more disorienting moments of the morning. "I have an attorney," she said. "You have an attorney. Things are in motion that I can't stop and you can't stop. Whatever happens between us personally, the legal process is going to move." "I know. I'm not trying to destroy the company," she said. "I need you to know that. Whatever you've been told, or whatever you're afraid of, that's not what I want." He looked at her. "Then what do you want?" he said. "I want Noah to have a father," she said. "I want the things that belong to me to be acknowledged as mine. I want—" She stopped. Started again. "I want the 10 years to have meant something on paper, the same way they meant something in real life." He was quiet for a long time. "The DNA report," he said. She had wondered when they would get here. "What about it?" she said. "I did some research," he said, "after you left. Matteo Vera is my— I know who he is. Elena, his company is enormous. If your identity is confirmed legally, the inheritance implications alone. I told you," she said, keeping her voice level. "That's not why I kept the information. It's not why I did the test. I understand that. But there are people who will see it differently. Like you," she said. "A beat. Like my attorneys," he said, "who are already asking whether the DNA connection has bearing on our marital assets, on the company's structure, on—" "Marcus Webb knows about the Vera situation," she said. "He'll handle whatever your attorneys raise." Adrian looked at her steadily. "Are you in contact with Vera?" he said. She had decided on the way to this conversation, in the half-asleep space of early morning, that she was not going to lie to Adrian. Not because she owed him honesty, exactly, but because she was done spending energy on deceptions that would eventually unravel anyway. "We've spoken once," she said, "through attorneys primarily." Adrian's expression shifted, not dramatically, a small tightening around the eyes. "What did today say?" Adrian said. "That's between me and my attorney. Elena." "Adrian," she looked at him. "You walked out of this room to take Celeste's call. Whatever you're owed in terms of my confidential legal communications, it's less than you think." He stood. He walked to the window. He stood with his back to her, looking out at whatever the hospital window looked at, which was a parking structure and a piece of gray November sky. "Celeste is going to be a problem," he said, and the way he said it was different, lower, like he was talking to himself as much as to her. She watched his back. "What does that mean?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "It means," he said, "that I've been there are things I didn't know. About her family's involvement," and he stopped. "Adrian." He turned. His face was doing something she didn't have a catalog entry for. It was not the boardroom face or the gala face or the face he wore when he was deciding. It was something underneath all of those, Something that looked like a man who has pulled a thread and watched more come with it than he expected. The Rowan family, he said, Celeste's father. I found out 3 days ago my own CFO came to me that there have been transactions moving through our port contracts that I didn't authorize, routing through intermediaries to access Vera shipping lanes. Elena went completely still. How long, she said. 14 months, he said. 14 months. The same amount of time Celeste had been his advisor. Adrian, she said carefully, did you know? No, he said. I did not know. She looked at him. I believe you, she said, which surprised her. But she did. My CFO found it because of the compliance system, he said. The flagging protocols you built in the first year. They still run. Nobody turned them off. They just sat there, running, and 3 days ago, they flagged a pattern that my CFO traced back to Celeste's family. The compliance system she had built. From scratch. Over 8 months of nights and weekends. You're telling me, she said slowly, that my system caught what your advisor was doing. He looked at her. Something in his expression cracked, just slightly, along an edge she hadn't seen before. Yes, he said. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that wasn't too large for the room they were in the state they were both in. The morning after Noah had arrived early and small and furious and wearing a yellow hat. I'm going to need to give that information to certain people, he said. Investigators. My own attorneys. But I needed to tell you first. Because I think… He stopped. I think Celeste knew about the DNA situation. I think her family did. I think they knew who you might be before I did, and I think it affected how they moved. Elena felt something cold settle into her bones. You think they were watching me, she said. I think they were watching the Vera network, he said. And I think when the genomics notification went out, whatever data they had access to, I think they knew. Or suspected. She thought about the last 6 weeks. About the feeling she'd had, twice, of being watched, which she'd attributed to paranoia, to the heightened alertness of a woman making plans she needed to protect. She thought about a phone left face down in a restaurant. About an email response from her OB's office that had been slightly delayed. Small things. Nothing she could point to. Nothing she could prove. I need to call Marcus, she said. I know. You should leave, she said. He looked at her. He looked at the door. He looked back. I'm sorry, he said. I know it doesn't cover what I owe you. I know that. But I'm sorry. She looked at him for a long time. Go see your son, she said through the glass. Go do that. He left. She called Marcus. He answered on the second ring and she said, without preamble, Celeste Rowan's family may have had access to information about the DNA test. Adrian just told me there are unauthorized transactions in the company's port contracts 14 months, starting when Celeste joined, and he thinks the Rowans knew about my connection to the Vera network. A pause. She heard Marcus set something down. That changes the picture, he said. How? If the Rowan family was using Adrian's company as a proxy to access Vera shipping lanes, and they knew you were a potential Vera heir, then your presence in that marriage was strategically significant to them, beyond just a CEO's wife. They needed me not to make noise, she said. Or they needed you discredited before you could, Marcus said. She let that sit. The emergency petition, she said. The restraining order on the laptop. That was fast. That was very fast. Harlan Cross filed within 12 hours of you leaving the apartment, Marcus said. Which, yes. I've been thinking about that. Harlan Cross is good, but not that good on his own in 12 hours. He had a framework ready. Celeste's family's attorneys gave him the framework, Elena said. Possibly. Not possibly, she said. Probably. She was out of the hospital in 4 days. Noah stayed. That was the part nobody prepared you for leaving a hospital without your child. She knew it was standard protocol, that the NICU kept premature infants for observation, that Noah was stable and improving and would be home within 3 to 5 weeks barring complications. She knew all of that. She walked out of the hospital on a Thursday morning and got in Donna's car and sat in the passenger seat and said nothing for 7 blocks, and then said, I need you to drive me back every day. Obviously, Donna said. Twice a day if they'll let me. Done. She went back to Donna's apartment. She ate food Donna made her eat. She took showers because her body needed it and because the routine of it was a container she could hold on to. She pumped milk every 3 hours with a mechanical precision that felt like the most useful thing she could do when everything else felt like it was being moved by forces she couldn't fully see yet. And she worked. Marcus had the copies of the laptop files in a secure location. She worked from her own memory, and from the backup drive, she had made one of the 3 external drives hidden in 3 separate locations, this one at Donna's, behind a stack of art books she'd stored there 2 years ago, for exactly this reason. She worked on reconstructing a timeline. 10 years of financial decisions, of compliance developments, of asset transfers, of contributions she'd made, and erasures that had followed them. She was building a map. On the 6th day after Noah was born, the first investigator contacted Marcus Webb. Not an attorney, an investigator. Federal Financial Crimes Unit, which told Elena that whatever Mateo Vera's legal team had set in motion, it had moved faster and at a higher altitude than she'd expected. Marcus called her in the afternoon and said, in the particular voice he used when things were serious, "They want to talk to you." Voluntary interview. "They're looking at the Rowan family's activities through Vail Maritime, and they believe you have documentation that establishes the baseline what the company's legitimate transaction patterns looked like before the unauthorized routing started. Because I built the compliance system," she said. "Because you built it, and because you have records from the period before Celeste arrived that nobody else has." "When?" she said. "They'd like to meet next week." "In your attorney's office. I'll be present the entire time." "Fine," she said. "Set it up, Elena." Marcus paused. "This is bigger than a divorce proceeding now. You understand that." "I understood that when Mateo Vera told me his company had been wadding Vail Maritime for 8 months, she said. "I mean bigger in terms of your exposure. If the Rowans believe you're cooperating with a federal investigation, they will come at you." "They already came at me," she said. "The petition, the restraining order attempt." She stopped. "Marcus, someone accessed my OB's patient portal 6 weeks ago. I got a security notification and assumed it was an administrative error. I need you to look at that." A pause. "I'll make a call," he said. She hung up and sat at Donna's kitchen table in the late afternoon light and thought about the shape of what she was inside. She had left with a suitcase. She had intended to go quietly, not invisibly, not without consequence, but quietly. She had planned to establish herself legally, to fight the company contribution battle in civil court, to manage the Vera situation slowly and on her own terms. She had planned for a manageable disruption. What she was inside now was something else. A federal investigation, a shipping dynasty with 30 years of grief, and a legal team that worked at international scale. A husband who had either been complicit or catastrophically naive, and she still didn't know which, and maybe neither did he. And some were Celeste Rowan, whose family had been routing unauthorized transactions through a compliance system that Elena herself had built, through a company Elena had helped fund, using a marriage Elena had lived in for a decade as cover. She felt not frightened exactly, something adjacent to it. The feeling of standing in a room and realizing the walls are farther apart than you thought, and also the ceiling is higher, and the door you came in through is no longer the closest one to you. On the 8th day, she got a call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't pick up. She picked up, Elena Vale, a woman's voice. Precise. The kind of precise that is trained, not natural. "Who is this?" Elena said. "My name is Sandra Cho. I'm an attorney with the Federal Financial Crimes Division. I know you have a meeting scheduled with my colleagues next week, but I'm calling because something has developed that I think you need to know before that meeting." Elena stood up from the couch. "What kind of something?" she said. "We executed a warrant this morning on Celeste Rowan's home and office," Sandra Cho said. "In the course of that search, we found documentation relating to the Vera shipping network, as expected. We also found something else." Elena waited. "We found a folder of documents specifically related to you," Sandra Cho said. "Your personal financial records, your medical history, your adoption records from the Massachusetts state system, your private genomics results from Hargrove, the full report, not just a summary, and communications between Celeste Rowan and her father, Robert Rowan, dating back 14 months, in which they could discuss, specifically, the value of your continued, their word, was containment within the marriage to Adrian Vale." The word sat in the air. Containment. "They had my medical records," Elena said. "Yes, they had the genomics report, a full copy, obtained approximately 3 weeks after Hargrove processed your results." "Hargrove has a data breach," Elena said. "We believe so, yes. That's a separate investigation." A pause. "Elena, the communications also reference a specific concern the Rowans had when they learned about the DNA results. They were afraid that if you discovered your connection to Mateo Vera, you would eventually come into contact with the Vera legal team, and that team would share with you the information about the unauthorized routing, which would collapse their access to the Vera lanes," Elena said. "Yes, so they needed the marriage to hold," Elena said. "They needed me to stay," or Sandra Cho said, and her voice was careful now, exactly as careful as Marcus Webb's voice when things were serious. They needed you destabilized enough that anything you said about the company would be read as a disgruntled wife rather than a credible witness. Elena stood at Donna's kitchen window. Outside the street was full of the ordinary activity of a Tuesday afternoon. People walking past with coffee and with dogs and with whatever their Tuesday was made of. She watched them and felt the distance between herself and that street like a physical thing. The speech, she said. At the gala. A pause. There are emails, Sandra Cho said, in which Celeste discusses the optics of Adrian's public comments about his wife, in which she advises a certain framing. Elena closed her eyes. She thought about the microphone, about the crowd, about the woman 3 seats down bringing her champagne glass to her lips, about the way Adrian had not looked at her. She was useful, back when I needed someone to hold things together. But that season's over. She had believed it was Adrian's arrogance, his particular capacity for dismissal, his way of discarding things he'd outgrown. It had been a script. How much did Adrian know, she said. Sandra Cho was quiet for a moment. That pause told Elena more than any answer would have. That, Sandra Cho said finally, is what we're still working to establish. Elena pressed her palm against the cold glass of the window. She thought about the hospital room, about his face when he said I didn't know, about the compliance system flagging the transactions, about him telling her before he had to, before his attorneys made him, before any deal was on the table. She thought about Noah in the NICU wearing a yellow hat. I'll be at your colleagues' meeting next week, she said. I'll bring everything I have. We appreciate, but I need something from you first, Elena said. I need to know that whatever you're building, whatever case this becomes, the employees of Vale Maritime are protected. The people who work there who don't know any of this. I need that on the table before I sit down in that room. A beat. I'll relay that to the team, Sandra Cho said. Don't relay it, Elena said. Confirm it. Silence. Then I'll confirm it. She ended the call. She stood at the window for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called the NICU nurse's station and asked about Noah. And the nurse said his oxygen levels had improved overnight, and he'd taken a full feeding at 6 that morning, and his color was good, and Elena said, thank you, and stayed on the line an extra 5 seconds just to hear the background sounds of that room, the soft mechanical rhythm of the ward where her son was learning to stay. She hung up. She went to the table and opened the backup drive. She had been building a map. Now she understood what the map was for. Not escape, not retreat, not the quiet disappearance she had planned on the night she packed the suitcase. Something she had no name for, yet something that felt like the opposite of running. Something that required her to stand exactly where she was and let everything that had been coming for her arrive and meet it with the thing she'd spent 10 years quietly, carefully, without anyone's help, building. Evidence. Precision. The compliance system that had kept running even when she left. The record she had saved in 3 locations. The account nobody knew about. The laptop with its iron-on lining. She had built the trap, and she had not known it. Now she understood that she had to walk into the center of it and let it close around the right people, and that doing that would cost her things she hadn't finished counting yet, and that she was going to do it anyway, and that because Noah was in a NICU wearing a yellow hat, and the Rowans had her medical records, and someone had used the word containment about her life, and Elena Reyes, who had been found alone in a bus station at 3 years old, with a silver bracelet and half a burned photograph, who had built herself from that point forward, with no map and no money, and no one who owed her anything, was done being contained. She opened the first folder. She started from the beginning. The federal meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday at 10 in the morning in Marcus Webb's conference room on the second floor, and Elena arrived 20 minutes early because she had not slept past 4:30 in 11 days, and because arriving early was the only form of control she had left that nobody could petition a court to take from her. She wore a dark gray blazer over a black shirt, her hair pulled back, the silver bracelet on her wrist. She had not worn it because it meant anything strategically. She wore it because her mother had kept it for her, and because Noah was still in the NICU, and because some mornings the only thread connecting who she was now to who she had always been was a small silver bird with its wings spread. Marcus was already there. He had coffee waiting and a yellow legal pad in front of him and the particular quality of stillness that Elena had come to read as his version of being completely ready. How he said, functioning, she said. Noah, they think another 10 days. Maybe less. His weight is up. Good. He said it like he meant it, which she appreciated. Sandra Cho will be here with 2 colleagues. They've cleared the scope of what they're asking you. This is a voluntary interview you can stop at any time. I'll be beside you the entire time, and nothing you say can be used against you in a subsequent proceeding without your attorney present and your explicit consent. I know, she said. I'm not worried about that. What are you worried about? He said. She looked at the table, at the backup drive she had set beside her coffee. That it won't be enough, she said. That I'll put everything I have in that room, and it still won't be enough to make it stick. Marcus looked at her steadily. It'll be enough, he said. She wanted to believe him. She almost did. Sandra Cho arrived at 9:58 with two men she introduced as agents from the Financial Crimes Unit, a tall one named Pryor and a compact, silent one named Delgado, who took notes and said almost nothing, and had the particular quality of attention that told Elena he was the one actually running the analysis. They set up recorder. They asked if she consented. She said yes. Then they started. It went for 3 hours and 40 minutes. She had thought she was prepared for the questions. She was mostly. What she hadn't prepared for was the pace, the way they moved from topic to topic without warning, testing not her answers but her consistency, watching for the places where her timeline wobbled. It didn't wobble. She had lived this timeline. She had built it year by year in her own body, in her own sleep-deprived evenings, in her own name on documents that had later disappeared from the official record. She walked them through the warehouse funding, the wire transfers from her personal account, the correspondence with Gerald Foster about the reorganization paperwork, the compliance system, not just what it did but how she'd built it, the specific regulatory framework she'd been responding to, the 18 months of regulatory shifts she'd tracked and built protocols around. The silent agent Delgado stopped writing at one point and looked up at her with something that might have been professional respect and went back to writing. Then they got to the 14 months of unauthorized routing. She pulled up the backup drive. She walked them through the compliance system's flagging architecture, the specific pattern recognition she'd built into it that had triggered the alert Adrian's CFO had eventually noticed. She showed them what a legitimate transaction looked like in the system she'd designed. She showed them what the flagged transactions looked like against that baseline. The divergence was not subtle. It was, in fact, shockingly clear once you understood how the system read it. You built this to catch exactly this kind of activity? Pryor said. I built it to catch regulatory violations, she said. The fact that it caught financial fraud is a function of what fraud looks like from a compliance architecture standpoint. The patterns rhyme. Delgado wrote something, underlined it. If this system was running the whole time, Sandra Cho said, why didn't anyone catch it sooner? Elena looked at her, because the people who would have flagged it to the right person were either reporting to Celeste Rowan or reporting to people who reported to Celeste Rowan, she said. She restructured the reporting chain 4 months after she joined. It's in the org chart revisions. I have the original org chart from before her arrival and the revised one from her 4th month. She pulled both up. The room was quiet. She reorganized around the compliance team, Marcus said, looking at the documents. It wasn't a question. She put herself between the compliance team and the CFO, Elena said, so that any flags would route through her before they reached Adrian or the board. Except the system still ran, Sandra Cho said. Except the system still ran, Elena confirmed, because it was integrated deep enough into the transaction infrastructure that removing it would have required taking the entire contract management system offline for a week, which would have been noticed. So they left it running and assumed the reports were going nowhere. Pryor leaned forward, and the CFO, he said, found a printed report in a filing cabinet 3 weeks ago, Elena said. A quarterly compliance summary that should have been routed to his desk but had been diverted. He found it because his assistant was reorganizing the physical files, and it was misfiled. A piece of paper. That's what broke this open. The room absorbed that. Pryor looked at Delgado. Something passed between them. We're going to need copies of everything, Sandra Cho said. It's already on there, Elena said, and pushed the backup drive across the table. She got back to Donna's apartment at 2:30. She ate half a sandwich Donna had left in the refrigerator. She went to the NICU and sat with Noah for an hour, holding him in the careful way she'd learned, arms supporting his whole body, his weight still astonishing in its smallness. He was more alert today. His eyes opened occasionally and found her face with the unfocused intensity of someone who was learning to locate things. I did it, she told him quietly. I gave them everything. Whatever happens now, I did it. His hand found her finger, closed around it. She stayed until the nurse told her visiting hours were ending, and then she stayed 5 more minutes until the nurse said it again with more conviction. She did not hear from Marcus until the following morning. He called at 7:45 and said they moved on Celeste Rowan last night. She sat up in the dark of Donna's back room. What does that mean? She said. They froze the Rowan family accounts connected to the Vail Maritime transactions. Celeste was served at her apartment at 11 p.m. Her attorneys have already filed a response, but the freeze stands pending a hearing. And Adrian? A pause. Adrian has been asked to step down from his position as CEO pending investigation of the company's governance failures during the relevant period, Marcus said. He hasn't been charged. That may not change. But the board convened an emergency session this morning at 7, and he tendered his resignation before they could vote on it. It was quiet, resigned, she said, an hour ago. She pressed her back against the headboard. Outside it was not yet light. She could hear the city warming up, the first trucks of the morning, the distant accumulation of a day beginning. Marcus, she said. What happens now? Now, Marcus said, the board of Vail Maritime needs to appoint interim leadership and the audit begins. And at some point in the next few weeks, there will be a board meeting to determine the company's path forward. He paused. There's been a request, Elena, from the board. They want to speak with you. She didn't say anything. Not as a witness, he said. As a founding contributor, they've reviewed the documentation from the early years. They want to understand your role formally, officially, on the record. They want to know how much I'm owed, she said. That's part of it, he said. The other part is that 2 board members have apparently been aware for some time that the company's founding story was incomplete. She thought about the board meeting, about a room full of people who had sat across from Adrian for years and believed the version of events he'd offered, about the compliance system still running, quietly, while everything around it tried to route fraud through the architecture she'd built. Set it up, she said. There's one more thing, Marcus said. She waited. Harlan Cross called me this morning. Adrian's attorney. He wants to discuss a settlement. Comprehensive the marital assets, your contribution claims, custody of Noah. He said Adrian wants to resolve it directly, without litigation. She felt something move through her chest. Not warmth exactly. Recognition. When? She said. He suggested this week if you're willing. She thought about whether she was willing. Tell him Thursday, she said. Marcus, I want you there and I want it in writing before I walk in the room. Of course. She hung up and lay in the early dark for another 10 minutes, not sleeping, just breathing, her hand resting on the place where Noah had been for 7 months. Then she got up, because there was work to do. The board meeting happened 4 days later in a conference room on the 44th floor of the Vail Maritime headquarters building, a room Elena had been in twice, once for a company anniversary event she'd attended as a spouse, once to drop off documents when the administrative staff was shorthanded, and nobody had thought to wonder why the CECO's wife was delivering compliance summaries. She came in with Marcus on her left and the backup drive in her bag. There were 7 board members. She had researched all of them. She knew which 2 Marcus had mentioned, a woman named Patricia Holden, who had been on the board since the company's 2nd year, and who Elena had learned, asked pointed questions about founding contributor credits at a board meeting 4 years ago that had been tabled without resolution, and a man named George Tate, who ran his own logistics firm, and who had apparently maintained a private file of questions about the company's capitalization history. She sat down. Patricia Holden looked at her across the table and said, without preamble, we've reviewed the documentation Ms. Webb submitted on your behalf. I want to say at the outset that what we found was not a surprise to everyone in this room, and I want to apologize on behalf of this board for the period of time during which a more thorough review was not initiated. Elena looked at her. Thank you, she said. Can you walk us through the founding contribution in your own words? Patricia said. She did. She had done it for the federal investigators, and now she did it for the board. But it was different this time, not because the facts were different, but because these were the people who had sat in rooms with Adrian for years and voted on the structure of the thing she was describing, and she could see in some of their faces the specific expression of people discovering that they have been an audience to a story that was missing most of its cast. She talked for 40 minutes. She answered questions for another 30. Delgado's name came up. The federal investigation was now a matter of record, and the board was aware of it, and she answered those questions carefully and precisely, with Marcus's hand on the table beside her, ready. Then George Tate said, Ms. Vail, what do you want from this board? She looked at him. I want an independent audit of the company's founding capitalization and an accurate accounting of my contribution, she said. I want that accounting to be part of the official corporate record. I want the employees of this company, the people who have nothing to do with what the Rowan family did, to be protected through whatever restructuring follows. And the Vera situation, Patricia Holden said. The room shifted slightly. Everyone in it knew by now it was too large a fact to contain. That's separate, Elena said. That's my personal situation and it doesn't belong in this room. It may affect the company's relationship with Vera International going forward, George Tate said, aggressively, observationally. That, Elena said, is a bridge that will be crossed when it's in front of us. Right now, what's in front of us is an audit and a restructuring, and making sure this company doesn't collapse and take 400 jobs with it. Patricia Holden looked at her for a long moment. You're not here for revenge, she said. No, Elena said. I'm here because I helped build this and it was taken off the record, and I'd like it put back. The audit was formally authorized before she left the building. Thursday came. The settlement meeting was in Harlan Cross's office, which was designed to communicate power in the specific way that men who are paid to communicate power on behalf of other men design their offices. Heavy furniture, city views, a quality of seriousness that was supposed to make you feel that what happened here mattered. Elena sat across from Harlan Cross and beside Marcus Webb, and she put her hands flat on the table and she looked at Adrian, who was sitting across from her, and she did not look away. He looked like he'd aged. Not dramatically, but something in his face had resettled, the way faces resettle when the architecture of what a person believed about themselves has shifted. He had not shaved in several days. His suit was perfectly pressed anyway, because Adrian Vale would appear in a settlement meeting in a perfectly pressed suit, even if the building was on fire. Before we begin, Adrian said. He wasn't looking at his attorney. He was looking at her. I need to say something. Harlan Cross put a hand on his arm. Adrian Harlan. Adrian didn't move his eyes from Elena. Give me a minute. A pause. Cross sat back. Adrian said, I knew Celeste's father had an interest in expanding into the Vera lanes. I thought it was a legitimate business interest. I didn't know the routing was unauthorized. I didn't know they were using our contract structure to access something that wasn't ours to access. His jaw tightened. I should have known. That's the part I can't get past. My own compliance system was running flags, and I didn't see them because she'd restructured the reporting chain, and I let her because I thought. He stopped. Because you trusted her, Elena said. He looked at her. Yes, he said. More than you trusted me, she said. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Adrian, she said, I'm not asking you to explain your relationship with Celeste. I stopped needing that explanation a long time ago. What I need from you today is this. I need you to sign the audit authorization. I need you to confirm in writing the founding contribution records. And I need custody of Noah agreed before we leave this room. His attorney started to speak. Adrian put a hand up. Primary custody, Elena said. You get regular, consistent access. Scheduled. Legal. Protected for Noah's sake. Not yours or mine. He gets to know his father. But he lives with me. She watched Adrian's face. She watched him do the calculation she'd watched him do 1,000 times, the ledger, the costs, the weighing of outcomes. She'd always found it cold. Today she found it almost human, because what she could see underneath it for the first time was that he was calculating what he could afford to lose, and he was arriving at the same answer she had. Yes, he said, and the company record, she said. My contribution, in the official record. Publicly correct. Harlan Cross leaned forward. That's a reputational. Harlan, Adrian said, quietly. Final. He looked back at Elena.
Yes.
She held his gaze. One more thing, she said. What? At the next public event you attend. Whatever that is, an interview, a press conference, a board statement. You say it. Not through an attorney, not in a filing. You say, publicly, that I helped build this company, and that the record was incomplete. The room was very quiet. Harlan Cross said, my client cannot commit to specific public statements in the context of an ongoing. Harlan, Adrian said again. He said it the way you say someone's name when you are done with their counsel. He looked at Elena. Something in his face was not the face she'd married, and not the face she'd spent the last months fighting. It was something older than both of those, something from before the ambition had fully covered everything underneath it. I'll say it, he said. She nodded. Once. Okay, she said. Then let's sign the papers. It took 2 more hours. There were documents and cross-references and 3 separate occasions when the attorneys argued about language that Elena and Adrian and sat through in a particular shared silence that was not warmth exactly, but was the specific register of 2 people who have known each other long enough to be tired of the same things at the same time. She signed the last page at 4:17 p.m. She stood up. She put on her coat, Elena, Adrian's voice behind her. She turned. He was standing. He looked tired. He looked like a man at the end of something. Is there anything I can do, he said, to not fix it? I know it's not fixable, but is there anything? She looked at him for a long moment. Be his father, she said, consistently, without an agenda. Show up when you say you will. That's all I need from you now. He nodded. She left. In the elevator going down, she stood with her back against the wall and pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum and took 3 slow breaths. Not because she was falling apart. Because she had been holding something very tightly for a very long time, and she was just now, in this elevator, between the 28th floor and the lobby, beginning to understand that she could loosen her grip slightly. Just slightly. Not yet all the way. Because 3 days later, Robert Rowan's attorneys filed a counterclaim. Not against the federal investigation against Elena directly. Tortious interference, defamation, misappropriation of trade secrets, which was so audacious that Marcus Webb, when he called to tell her, actually laughed a short, professional sound that stopped quickly. They're trying to bury you in paper, he said. Make you spend the next 2 years in depositions. Can say, she said. They can try, he said. But the federal investigation creates a very inconvenient context for anyone trying to argue that the person who handed over the key evidence is the bad actor. Is it going to work, she said. No, he said. But it's going to be ugly for a while. She was at the NICU when he called. Noah was in her arms, fully in her arms now, without leads, the first time she'd held him without the monitoring equipment attached, 17 days after he arrived, 4 pounds 15 ounces, and furious about something he couldn't articulate. She looked at her son's face while Marcus told her about the counterclaim. She thought about the word containment. She thought about a 3-year-old girl in a bus station with a bracelet and half a photograph. She thought about her mother ironing other people's clothes above a dry cleaner's in South Boston and saying, "You are going to be something, Elena. And the difference between you and the people who try to stop you is that you know what you're made of and they don't." She put her thumb against Noah's palm. He closed his fingers around it immediately. Instinct, grip. "Tell me what I need to do," she said to Marcus. "There's a board meeting at Vail Maritime next week," he says. "The interim CEO wants you present for the audit findings. And Robert Rowan's team has requested the counterclaim be heard before a judge in Elena. They've requested it be heard in the same session as the federal case. They want to force a simultaneous proceeding. They want to create confusion," she said. "They want to create a version of events where everything is in dispute simultaneously and nothing can be resolved cleanly. Which means I need to walk into that board meeting with everything," she said. Everything. The audit findings, the federal cooperation, the original records, the compliance system data. Everything in one room in one moment, yes, Marcus said. "And Matteo Vera," she said. "His legal team has the Rowan Vera transaction documentation. If they present it simultaneously, I've already spoken to his attorneys," Marcus said. "They're aligned. They want the same outcome." She looked at her son. "Okay," she said. "Elena," I said, "Okay, Marcus." Her voice was steady. "Set up the board meeting. Get Matteo Vera's team on a call. Tell Sandra Cho that whatever she needs from me for the federal filing, she has it. All of it. Whatever it takes." She hung up. She held Noah and felt his weight, which was growing, which was real, which was the most real thing she had access to at the moment. And she said nothing for a while, just breathed, just let the NICU do its quiet, competent work around her. Then she said to Noah, because she had gotten into the habit of saying true things to him, "We're almost through it." He made a sound. Not a word. Not even a real sound. Just a breath that had something effortful in it. Something that reminded her of the one high thin cry he'd made when he arrived. That sound of something that had not wanted to arrive early but had been given no choice. She had 6 days before the board meeting. She had the backup drive and the federal investigators and Matteo Vera's international legal team and Marcus Webb and 17 days of a son who had decided, against the odds, to stay. She had everything she needed. She had built the compliance system that caught the fraud. She had funded the warehouse that started the company. She had kept the records that no one thought she was smart enough to keep. She had stitched the lining back into a suitcase on a Tuesday afternoon with steady hands, and she had waited, and she had been patient, and she had been ready, and now the room where everything came together was 6 days away, and Robert Rowan's attorneys could file whatever they liked, because when Elena Vale walked into that board meeting and opened the laptop that had been hidden under iron-on hem tape in, a suitcase on a high shelf in a guest room closet, she was going to put 10 years of truth on that table and dare anyone in the room to look away. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 in the morning, and Elena arrived at 8:40 with Marcus Webb and a woman named Claire Sato, who was Matteo Vera's lead American attorney, and who had the particular quality of someone accustomed to walking. into rooms where she was underestimated and had stopped finding it interesting. Elena had slept 5 hours. She had eaten breakfast because Marcus had told her to, and because no one needed her functional, and because she had learned in the last weeks that the body keeps its own accounting regardless of what the mind is managing. She had fed herself and showered and put on the same dark blazer from the federal interview because it was the thing she'd been wearing when she felt most like herself, and she needed that today more than she needed variety. The silver bracelet was on her wrist. The laptop was in her bag. The conference room at Vail Maritime headquarters was the same one she'd been in 6 days ago, but today it was fuller. All 7 board members. 2 attorneys from the federal investigation, Sandra Cho and Delgado, who had brought a second yellow legal pad and filled the first one already, apparently. 3 members of the company's audit team who had been working for 6 days straight and looked like it. Harlan Cross was there, which meant Adrian was involved in some capacity, though he was not in the room. Mateo Veyra's team occupied 3 seats along one side of the table, and Robert Rowan's attorneys, 2 of them, in identical dark suits with identical expressions of managed aggression, sat at the far end with a stack of documents Elena estimated at roughly 200 pages. She sat down. She put the laptop on the table. She put her hands flat on either side of it. Patricia Holden, who was chairing the meetings in the absence of a permanent CEO, said, "We're here to receive the audit findings and to address the concurrent legal matters raised by Rowan Associates. I want to establish at the outset that this board has authorized full cooperation with the federal investigation and that any counterclaims filed against parties cooperating with that investigation will be reviewed in that context." One of the Rowan attorneys, the taller one, whose name Elena had looked up the night before, Gordon Slate, 22 years in corporate litigation, never lost a proceeding he'd initiated, said, "With respect, the counterclaim against Ms. Vail is a separate matter from—" "It is not separate," Claire Sato said. She said it pleasantly, the way someone says something pleasant when they have already won the argument and are waiting for the room to catch up. "The counterclaim against my clients against Ms. Reyes is directly predicated on the same transactions that are the subject of the federal investigation. Any attempt to adjudicate it separately is a procedural strategy, and this board should be aware that the federal team has formally noted the timing of the Rowan filing." Gordon Slate looked at Sandra Cho. Sandra Cho said noted. Gordon Slate's expression did not change, but something behind it did. Patricia Holden said, "Let's begin with the audit findings." The lead auditor, a woman named Janet Reese, who had been doing forensic accounting for 30 years, and who spoke in the particular cadence of someone translating a foreign language that only she fully understood, presented the findings in 45 minutes. Elena listened to the numbers she had lived through described in the language of formal accounting and felt a strange doubling the way it sounded now, precise and official and permanent, versus the way it had felt at the time, which was her own savings, her own work, her own nights, her own name on a wire transfer to a warehouse in Hoboken, while Adrian drove back from Newark at 3 in the morning with a plan in his head and her money under the lease. The founding contribution was confirmed at a figure that made 2 board members shift in their chairs. The compliance system was formally attributed. Date of design, date of implementation, architect of record, Elena Reyes Vail. The audit confirmed that her name had been absent from the Yorgeji paperwork filed in year 2, and that the documentation established no legitimate reason for that absence.
Janet Reese finished. She closed her folder.
She looked at no one in particular, which was the expression of someone who had delivered findings like this before, and understood that the room needed a moment before it could respond. Gordon Slate spoke first. The Rowan counterclaim specifically contends that the documentations Vail has provided constitutes misappropriated company property and that her removal of said documents from the marital home. The documents she removed, Marcus Webb said, predate the company's incorporation under its current structure. They are personal financial records, personal correspondence, and records she created and maintained independently. The only document that relates to company operations in any current sense is the compliance system architecture, which the audit has now confirmed she created, which means the only entity with a legitimate claim to those documents is her. Slate said, "Our position is that the compliance system, once implemented within Vail Maritime, belongs to the company," Marcus said, "not to the Rowan family, not to a counterclaim to the company, which this board represents. And this board has just received an audit confirming who created it. So if the Rowan family would like to pursue their claim to something that belongs to Vail Maritime, they're welcome to have that conversation with Vail Maritime's new legal team." But it has nothing to do with my client. Slate's jaw moved. A small, involuntary adjustment. Sandra Cho said the federal investigation has subpoenaed all relevant documentation related to the Rowan transactions. Any civil counterclaim affecting those documents is subject to federal hold. Mr. Slate, I believe your firm received that notice yesterday morning. Slate said, we received it. Then you understand that proceeding with any element of the counterclaim that touches those documents is not currently an option, Sandra Cho said. Still pleasant. Still the measured voice of someone in complete control of the temperature of the room. Patricia Holden looked at Gordon Slate. Is there any element of your counterclaim that does not touch those documents? She said. A long pause. We'll need to review the scope, Slate said. You do that, Patricia Holden said. She looked back at the room. The board accepts the audit findings. We will formally enter the corrected founding contribution record today. We will release a public statement which our communications team has prepared correcting the historical record as it relates to Ms. Reyes-Vale's role in the company's founding, and we will forward the audit findings to the federal investigation team as requested. She paused. Is there anything else that needs to be addressed in this room today? Claire Sato said, Vera International would like to formally establish a framework for renegotiating the port access agreements that were accessed without authorization. We're not seeking damages at this time, we're seeking a clean reset and a legitimate structure going forward. George Tate said, the board will engage with that. We'll need 2 weeks to establish interim leadership capacity before those conversations can begin meaningfully. Claire Sato nodded. Elena had said almost nothing for the last hour and 40 minutes. She had sat with her hands on the table and her laptop in front of her, and she had listened to everything she had built being accurately described by other people in official language and entered into an official record. She had waited a long time for an accurate description. Patricia Holden looked at her. Miss Reyes-Vale, she said, is there anything you want to say for the record? Elena looked at the room, at the board members and the auditors and the attorneys and the 2 men from the federal investigation who had spent the last 2 weeks working with what she'd given them. She thought about what she wanted to say. She said, I want the employees to know this wasn't about taking anything. The 400 people who work here didn't do anything wrong, and they should hear that from this board clearly and soon. Patricia Holden said agreed. We'll communicate directly to staff today. And the audit findings, Elena said, the corrected record. I'd like that to be a complete document, not a footnote in a quarterly filing. A complete document accessible with my name on it. That's what we're committing to, Patricia Holden said. Elena looked at her for a moment. Then I'm done, she said. She picked up the laptop. She put it in her bag. She walked out of the room before the attorneys started their next conversation. Because she had been in that room for everything she needed to be in it for, and she was not going to sit in it for a moment longer than that. Marcus caught up with her in the hallway. That's it, he said. Is it, she said. The counterclaim will be withdrawn within a week, he said. The federal case is solid. The Rowan family's exposure is too significant for them to keep fighting a side battle against you. They'll cut their losses. She looked at the elevator. And Adrian, she said, he'll cooperate with the investigation. I think he always was going to, once it was clear there was no version of this where he came out looking good by being silent. Marcus paused. He reached out to my office this morning, before the meeting. He wanted me to tell you he stopped. He said, tell her I called the press office myself about the public statement. I didn't wait for the board to make me. She stood with that for a moment. Okay, she said. The elevator came. She got in. She went to the NICU. Noah came home 11 days later, 28 days after he'd arrived. 5 pounds and 2 ounces. The yellow hat which a nurse named Bridget had given her to keep was in Elena's bag. He wore a different hat going home white with small gray stars, and Elena carried him through the hospital lobby with the particular careful deliberateness of someone transporting something irreplaceable. That was exactly what she was doing. Donna held the door. The cab driver didn't say anything, just drove, which was the right call. Elena had found an apartment in the West Village 2 weeks earlier, not Donna's, but 3 buildings down, a 2-bedroom on the 2nd floor with good light and a grocery store on the corner and a park within walking distance. She had signed the lease with her own name, the account she'd maintained independently, the money she'd set aside in the years of her marriage without asking permission and without being asked about it. The apartment was not ready when Noah came home. There were boxes and an assembled crib and a chair she'd bought secondhand that needed reupholstering and a kitchen that was functional but not yet familiar. It looked like what it was, a beginning. Something that had not yet found its shape. She put Noah in the crib and sat in the secondhand chair, and watched him sleep for a while. She had been told she should sleep when he slept. She did not sleep. She sat and looked at the apartment and thought about what it was going to be, the life inside these walls, and she did not yet know what that would look like in any specific detail, but she knew the feeling she was looking for, the specific quality of a room that is entirely yours. She would know it when she built it. Matteo Vira came to New York in December. She had agreed to meet him after 2 months of attorney-mediated communication. Into a restaurant in the West Village she had suggested because it was 2 blocks from her apartment and because she wanted to be able to leave easily if she needed to. She had told Marcus and she had told Donna and she had not told anyone else. She arrived first. She ordered water and a cup of soup because Noah had been up twice the night before and her body ran cold when she didn't sleep enough. She sat at the table and looked at the door. He came in at 12:02. She recognized him from the photographs, but photographs had not communicated the way he moved carefully. She thought, like a man who had learned to be careful with himself after a long time of not being careful enough. He was older than she'd expected, though she'd known his age. Grief did something to time that made people seem both older and younger than their years, and Matteo Vira had been carrying a specific grief for 30 years. He saw her. He stopped for a moment just inside the door, the way Adrian had stopped in the hospital room, the way people stop when the architecture of what they expected turns out to be different from what's in front of them. She did not stand. She waited. He crossed to the table. He sat down. He looked at her. She looked at him. She was looking for the thing she'd been looking for, something she recognized, some echo of herself in the landscape of another face. She found it finally in the set of his jaw when he was controlling an emotion, something compressed, something that would not be shown until it had been decided it was safe to show. She did that too. She had done it her whole life. "Hello," she said. "Hello," he said. His voice was the same as the phone, low, accented underneath the English. They sat in the restaurant, and the waiter came, and he ordered coffee, and she ordered nothing more, and then they were just 2 people at a table with 30 years of something between them that had no adequate name. "I don't know how to do this," she said. She said it because it was true, and because she had decided that the only way through this particular conversation was to say true things. "Neither do I," he said. "I'm not angry at you," she said. "I want you to know that. Whatever happened, I don't know the whole story of how I ended up in Boston, and I may never know all of it, and I've made a kind of peace with not knowing." He nodded. She could see him deciding something. "I have to tell you something," he said. "Something I should have said through the attorneys, but couldn't, because I needed to say it to your face." She waited. "Your mother, your biological mother, she died trying to get you somewhere safe," he said. She knew something was wrong. Someone in the company, in those years, she knew, and she was trying to protect you. And she didn't, he stopped. She didn't make it. But you did. And the bracelet, he looked at her wrist. He looked at the silver bird. She put it on you herself. That morning, Elena looked at the bracelet. She had worn it for 30 years. She had worn it through everything through South Boston and graduate school, and the years of building herself, and the years of building a company with a man who would eventually forget to look at her. She had worn it without knowing what it meant, or knowing only what her adoptive mother had told her, which was, "You came to us wearing this," and whatever else we didn't know, we knew someone loved you enough to put it on you. Someone had. She pressed her fingers over the bracelet. The silver had gone warm from her skin. "I'm sorry," Matteo said. "I know that doesn't help." "I know it doesn't. It helps," she said. Her voice was steady, which surprised her. "It helps to know." They talked for 2 hours, not about the company or the attorneys, or the legal proceedings that were still unwinding through their respective structures. About smaller things, which turned out to be larger. About a house outside Rome where she had apparently learned to walk on a stone terrace overlooking a garden. About a dog whose name she would not have remembered, but whose existence Matteo described with the specificity of someone who had kept every detail because he hadn't known which one she might someday want. About the half of the burned photograph he had the other half, he told her, and she went very still, and he reached into his jacket pocket and put it on the table between them. She looked at it for a long time before she picked it up. It was a woman holding a small child. The woman's face was partially missing. The photograph had been torn or burned, and the damage had taken most of her. But the child's face was clear. A small girl with dark hair and the set jaw of someone, already, at 3 years old, deciding to hold something in. She matched her half to his, the image completed. The woman was looking at the child with an expression Elena had no word for, and she understood, looking at it, that she had never had a word for it because she had only seen it in her adoptive mother's face on the days when she thought Elena wasn't watching. She put the photograph down on the table. She pressed her hands flat on either side of it. "I have a son," she said. "His name is Noah. He's 6 weeks old. He was premature and he's fine now, and She stopped. "He's the best thing." Mateo looked at her. His eyes were wet. He made no move to hide it. "I would like to meet him someday," he said. "When you're ready, if you decide you want that." "I don't know when that is," she said. "I know." "I'm not ready to call you," she stopped. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to. I'm not asking for anything, Elena. I spent 30 years afraid I would never get to sit across from you and see what you became. What you became is..." He stopped. He looked at the table. "You built something from nothing. You protected yourself. You did what you had to do. That is not..." He pressed his lips together briefly. "That is not nothing what you did." She looked at him. "My mother," she said, "Margaret Reyes. She was a good mother." "Yes," he said, without hesitation. "I believe she was." "I'm going to name something after her," Elena said. "A foundation. For separated families. For mothers in difficult situations. For children looking for where they came from." She paused. "I'd like it to have her name in it. Margaret. And maybe..." She looked at the photograph. "And maybe the name I was born with, if I decide to use it." Mateo was quiet for a moment. "Isabella," he said. It was the first time she had heard it said aloud to her face, by someone who had known it for 30 years as the name of something lost. She let it sit in the air between them. "Maybe," she said. He accepted that. The divorce was finalized in February. Asina sat in Marcus's office and signed the papers and felt very little, which was not numbness, but was the particular quiet of something that had been in motion for a long time arriving at its natural end. The settlement acknowledged her founding contribution. The custody arrangement gave her primary responsibility for Noah and Adrian consistent, structured access every other weekend, and 2 evenings per week and every other major holiday. The architecture of a shared parenthood designed not for the couple that had broken, but for the child who hadn't. Adrian had started attending meetings with a therapist, which she knew because he'd told her at the custody mediation, with a directness that surprised her, not seeking absolution, just stating it as a fact about his current life. She had said good. She had meant it. He had made the public statement in January. At a press conference related to the company's restructuring, he had said without notes, she was told, without the press statement in front of him, that the official account of Vale Maritime's founding had been incomplete, and that his former wife, Elena Reyes, had funded the company's first warehouse, had designed the compliance system that still ran in its infrastructure, and had contributed in ways that the public record had failed to acknowledge. He said it in 3 sentences clearly, without qualification. She had not watched the press conference. She had read the transcript. She had read it once, sitting in the second-hand chair in her apartment while Noah slept, and then she had put her phone down and sat in the quiet and felt the specific weight of being told the truth by someone who did not have to, at a cost she understood he paid. It wasn't an apology for all of it. It wasn't close to being enough for all of it. But it was the thing she had asked for, and it had been given, and she had learned in the years of her life to receive things that were given without immediately cataloging what was still missing. The Isabella Grace Foundation was incorporated in March. She had chosen the name sitting at her kitchen table at 2 in the morning, while Noah slept in the next room, which was where most of the real decisions of her life seemed to happen in small hours, in quiet, without an audience. She had written both names on a piece of paper, Isabella, for the child she had been, and the family that had lost her. Grace, for her adoptive mother's middle name, which Margaret had never used and which Elena had always loved. She had looked at the name on the paper for a long time. Then she had written the mission statement, which was not simple and not short, and had needed 3 drafts, because she was trying to say something true about what families separated by circumstance required, and what systems consistently failed to provide them, and true things about complicated subjects take time to get right. The first office was a rented space in the West Village. 2 rooms. She hired a program director in April, a woman named Rosa, who had spent 12 years working in child welfare, and who answered Elena's first interview question, which was, "What does this work cost you personally?" with a directness that told Elena she was the right person. She hired 3 more people by summer. She applied for grants and received some and was rejected for others, and wrote revised applications and resubmitted them, because this was how things were built, not in a single gesture, but in the accumulation of attempts, some of which worked and some of which had to be done again differently. Mateo contributed. She had asked him to formally through the foundation's donor channels because she wanted his involvement to be structured and transparent and not entangled with the other things they were still slowly learning to navigate. He had accepted those terms without objection, which was the thing about him she was, gradually finding she could trust that he did not push past the boundaries she set, even when she could see it cost him something. She let him meet Noah in June, in the park near her apartment on a Sunday morning with Donna present and no expectation of duration or significance. He sat on a bench and she handed Noah to him and watched. Mateo held her son with the careful deliberateness of a man who understood he was being entrusted with something and did not take that lightly. Noah looked at his face with the alert, assessing gravity that babies brought to new things. After a while, he reached up and grabbed Mateo's finger, the same instinctive grip he'd used with Elena on that day in the NICU, the grip that said, "I have found something and I am holding it." Mateo looked up at Elena. She looked back. They did not say anything. There was nothing that needed to be said that could be said yet, and neither of them pushed it. She was not his daughter yet. She was still learning what that word meant in the context of a man she had spoken to a dozen times and eaten one meal with, and knew through a legal process and a DNA report and a half of a burned photograph. She was still learning whether the word would ever fit the way she needed it to, or whether they would find another word, or whether they would build something that didn't need a word. She was a patient person. She had built that quality over a lifetime of necessity. She could wait to find out. The summer passed in the way that summers pass when you are building something from nothing too fast in the overall shape, very slow in the daily experience of it. She was tired most of the time. She was behind on correspondence most of the time. She ate standing over the kitchen counter more often than she sat at the table. She called her adoption agency and requested any records they had and received 3 pages that told her almost nothing she didn't already know and filed them in the suitcase where she kept the things that mattered. The suitcase sat in her closet. She had not repacked it. She had emptied it when she moved into the apartment and put the laptop on her desk and the letters from her mother in the drawer beside her bed and the photograph both halves together now, held with a small piece of tape on the shelf in Noah's room where she could see it when she fed him at night. She had kept the suitcase. She kept it because throwing it away would have been a gesture, and she was past gestures. She kept it because it had held everything that mattered when she had needed to carry it, and now the things that mattered had rooms of their own, which was a different kind of keeping. In October, on a morning when the light came in sideways through the apartment windows, and Noah was sitting up on his own for the first time, not reliably, not for long. But the effort was there, the determined wobble of a small person learning to hold himself upright in the world. She carried the suitcase out of the closet and set it by the front door. She stood and looked at it. It was just a suitcase. Hard-sided, old, the kind of object that accumulated in lives and meant nothing and meant everything depending on what you'd carried in it and when. The iron-on hem tape along the lining seam had been replaced by a proper restitching she'd done herself one evening in March, because the tape edge had started to lift. She had sat at her kitchen table and stitched the lining back flat with the same calm she'd had, the first in the same hands, that did not shake. There was nothing in the lining now. She picked up the suitcase and carried it down to the front door of the building, where a donation bin stood for the building's quarterly clothing drive. She paused. She thought about it for a moment, not long, just a moment. Then she turned and carried it back upstairs. She put it in the closet. Not because she needed it. Not because she was afraid of not having it, but because she had learned, in the year since she'd packed it in the dark, with her hands not shaking and her son moving inside her and her heart doing the thing it does when you are finally done, pretending she had learned that there was a difference between carrying something and being carried by it. She no longer needed to run from anything. She had built, in this apartment and this foundation and this arrangement of a life, something she did not need to escape from. The suitcase was hers. It had done its work. It could rest now. She closed the closet. She went back to Noah, who was wobbling upright on the living room floor with an expression of absolute determination, as if the business of holding himself up was the only thing in the world that mattered, and he intended to master it, regardless of how long it took. She sat down across from him on the floor. She put her hands out, palms up. He wobbled. Looked at her. "I've got you," she said. He reached forward. She caught him. She caught him, and he laughed, not the uncertain sound he'd been making for the past few weeks, the exploratory half-law of someone testing whether a thing was funny, but a full sound, surprised and delighted, The sound of someone who had fallen and been caught and found that falling was not as frightening as it had seemed before the catching. She held him against her chest and felt his whole body shake with it. Again, she said. He pushed against her, which was Noah's current version of yes. She set him back up. He wobbled. She pulled her hands back. He looked at her with an expression she had catalogued as his serious face brows slightly drawn, eyes tracking, the face he made when he was deciding whether something was worth the effort. He decided yes. He reached forward. She caught him again. They did this for 20 minutes, which was a very long time in the life of a 7-month-old and a not insignificant portion of Elena's morning, and she was not anywhere else in her head during those 20 minutes. She was entirely there, on the floor of her West Village apartment, catching her son. Later, she would think that this was the thing no one told you about building a life from the ground up, not the paperwork or the legal proceedings or the audit findings or the board meetings, not the 2A. M, grant applications, or the fights with contractors about the foundation's office renovation, or the careful ongoing negotiations of a co-parenting arrangement, with a man she was still, in some complicated way, learning to know as a stranger. Nobody told you that the actual work of it happened on a floor in the ordinary light of an October morning, with a small person who was learning to trust that the falling had an end to it. Adrian came on Sunday. He always came on Sunday now, and he was never late, which was the thing Elena had asked for, and the thing he had, in the months since the custody agreement was finalized, quietly and consistently delivered. He did not make it a performance. He did not arrive with gifts designed to compensate for something or leave with promises designed to extend the visit. He arrived, he spent time with Noah, he left. She had not expected the consistency. She had hoped for it and not expected it, which was the particular arithmetic of hope after a long marriage. He came to the door and she handed Noah over, and Noah went to him without hesitation, which was the best evidence she had that the arrangement was working, not her own feelings about it, not the legal language in the custody document, but the uncomplicated way her son moved toward his father. Children that age had no diplomacy. They went toward what felt safe and away from what didn't. Noah went toward Adrian with both hands out. He's sitting up on his own now, she said. Since when? Adrian said. He was looking at Noah the way he'd looked at him through the NICU glass on the first morning, with something in his face that had no calculation in it. This morning, she said. Not for long. But he's got the idea. Adrian looked at her. A quick look, not lingering. Good, he said. Yes, she said, it is. She went back inside. She made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the Foundation's program report she needed to review before Monday's staff meeting, and she read it with the particular divided attention of a woman whose child was in the next room with someone she was still learning to trust in a new configuration, and she found she could hold both things, the report and the awareness of the room next door, without either one overwhelming the other. That was new, that capacity. She had not had it a year ago. She thought sometimes about the woman who had packed the suitcase. Not as a past self she'd transcended. She didn't think of it that way. Didn't believe in the clean narrative of transformation, where pain is a chrysalis, and what comes out the other side is purely better. She thought of that woman as continuous with who she was now. Same hands. Same jaw that set when she was holding something in. Same instinct to document, to save, to prepare for the proof she might someday need. That woman had known something important, that what she'd built had value whether or not anyone acknowledged it. She had known it quietly, privately, with no audience, for long enough that it had become structural, not a belief she held, but a thing she was built from. Nothing that had happened in the past year had given her that. It had only confirmed what was already there. In November, the federal case against the Rowan family entered its formal charging phase. Robert Rowan was indicted on 4 counts. Celeste Rowan was named as a co-conspirator in 2 of them and reached a cooperation agreement that her attorneys characterized as voluntary, and that Sandra Cho, when Elena asked, characterized with a single word, late. Elena was not required to testify. Her documentation was entered as evidence, and she was listed as a cooperating witness, and that was the extent of her formal participation in a proceeding that would take another year to fully resolve. She followed it the way she followed things that were important, but no longer the center of her attention periodically, with interest, without urgency. She had other things at the center now. Rosa, her program director, had developed a referral network with 3 family law nonprofits by December. The foundation served 41 families in its first year of operation. 41 families was not a large number in the scope of the problem they were addressing. Elena put that number on the wall in her office, where she could see it, not as an achievement but as a baseline. Next year would be more. She intended that. Mateo called on Noah's first birthday. Not to speak to Noah, who would not have understood a phone call, but to speak to Elena briefly, to acknowledge the day. He had sent a gift through the mail, a small hand-carved wooden bird, silver-painted, wings spread. No note attached because no note was necessary. Elena had put it on the shelf in Noah's room, next to the photograph. She had looked at both of them for a moment, the photograph and the bird, the things that connected her son to a history that was also hers, and she had felt something settle in her that had been in motion for a very long time. She called Mateo back. "Thank you," she said. "Of course," he said. A pause. Not uncomfortable. The kind of pause that exists between people who are learning each other and have reached the point where silence is not a problem to be solved. "I'm coming to Rome in the spring," she said, for a conference. "Foundation work." She paused. "I thought maybe if the timing works, Noah and I could stay a few extra days." The silence on the other end was brief. "The timing will work," Mateo said. "We'll see the stone terrace," she said. "Yes," he said. And his voice had something in it she recognized now, that compressed quality, the thing held in, the jaw set. "I would like that very much." "Okay," she said. "Spring then." She hung up. She went into Noah's room. He was asleep, which was where most of his best work still happened, the growing, the consolidating, the becoming. She stood in the doorway and looked at him in the dim light, at the round, serious face that was still assembling itself into the face it would have. And she felt not happiness exactly, not the uncomplicated warmth that word implied. She felt something more like rightness. The specific quality of a life that has been put in order by hand, imperfectly, over a long time, by someone who had no blueprint. She looked at the shelf, at the photograph and the wooden bird. She looked at her wrist. At the silver bracelet, worn smooth in the places, her fingers found it most often intact, still the shape of a bird with its wings spread and its feet drawn up, still warm from her skin the way it had been warm since the morning someone who loved her had put it there. She was 34 years old. She had a son and a foundation and an apartment with good light, and a father she was slowly, carefully, on her own terms, learning to know. She had a compliance system that still ran in a company that now credited her for building it. She had a suitcase in a closet that she no longer needed to pack. She had the bracelet. She turned off the light in Noah's room and went back to the kitchen and poured the last of the coffee and stood at the window, looking out at the street below, the ordinary evening traffic of a life being lived. And she was not running from anything, and she was not hiding anything, and she was not waiting for a door to open or close, and she was not packing. She was just standing at her window, in her apartment, in her life, the one she had built 2 minutes ago.